and we watch what's going on in our world and people attacking because of lives. It just is just disturbing and sad to me. So Lord, I pray that you would give us wisdom, that we find our hope, our joy, and our peace completely and utterly in you. So today we're returning to our series called Counterfeit Gods, defeating the idols that battle for your heart. And if you remember, we started talking about this several weeks ago, and we started talking about how idolatry is a real thing, and it's not something that just happens in backwoods countries or, primitive people. It is a real thing, and it happens in modern America. I think our idols are a lot more pervasive now than they were 100 years ago. I think we've allowed things to take God's place, and I think we've allowed our own selves to be put in God's place. One of my friends of mine talks about, we talk about being God having the throne in my heart, and we crown him king and we make him boss. But I think there's too many of us that say, okay, God, you can have the recliner in the corner, but I'm giving my fear the couch, and my lust is get the easy chair, and we've got all these other things that we crown king in our heart, and we just want to add God to it. I still remember hearing a sermon, a soldier talking about one day about how there's no atheist in the foxhole. And he said that he met this guy when he was in boot camp, and this guy was an atheist. He didn't believe in any kind of God. And they had been out on combat patrol, and they were out there and doing something, and he came across this guy who was serving in another troop, and this guy now had a cross, a Star of David, an Islam thing. He said, I'm not taking any chances. I don't want to offend any God. If I don't know which one's the real one, so I don't want to offend any of them. And I think that's part of our problem is more people give a lot of things God's rightful place. And so we want to talk about our relationships today. And we've talked about the God of sex and the God of entertainment and the God of success. And we've talked about God being a God who's jealous for me. And we've talked about the God of food. And we've all struggled in some of those areas. But I think that tonight we're going to talk about the God of money. Now, our relationship with money begins at a very early age as we watch our parents and learn about the pull and the power of money. Money, and I'm guilty. I've done it too. I sit there and, if I only had this kind of money, I could do this and this. I could really be successful if God would just give me millions of dollars and I could go out and do this and this. You know what? God doesn't need to give me $1 million. If God wants me to do that, he'll provide a way for me to do it. And it doesn't take money to do it. It takes God being in control. And see, when you do that, what you're saying is, God, I need you to give me money so that I can take care of all this. But what you're making God into an ATM machine. And he's not. He's not there to just give you what you want. One day a man came home to his wife, and his 3-year-old daughter had a hard day at work. And after a hard day at work. And he looked at his daughter and says, do you have a kiss for your daddy? And she looked at him and says, no, I'm not kissing you, daddy. And he looked at her and said, man, I'm so hurt. Your daddy works hard all day long to bring home money for you. And this is how you treat me? Come on now, give me a kiss. She looked her daddy right in the eye and says, okay, Dad, first, where's my money? The God of money wants us to think that winning means getting lots of money. And so we've taken and we've corrupted what winning really means, and we've turned success into something that God never intended. And so we think, oh, this person has millions of dollars, they must be happy. But the thing is, the God of money wants us to think more money, the more money we have, the happier we'll be, and the better our lives will be. And we run around in pursuit of something that really doesn't give us happiness. Kyle Idleman writes this: sometimes we hear rich people say things like, money doesn't make you happy, but most of us think they all flew first class to some exotic destination where they got together and agreed to say that to make the rest of us feel better. But the truth is that having a lot of money doesn't lead to happiness. Someone wants to find money as an article which may be used as a universal passport to everywhere except heaven, and as a universal prior for everything except happiness. Brad Pitt in 1999 did an interview, and in the interview he responded to people's illusion that he had the perfect life. He says, once you've got everything, then you're just left with yourself. It doesn't help you sleep any better. It doesn't wake you up any better. You don't feel better because of it. You're just still dealing with the same person you had before you got all the money. Money does not change you. You're still the same person you were before you got rich. Do you know, I read a shocking statistic. You know, we always talk about people winning the lottery. Do you know that 70% of all lottery winners are broke within a year? They got the money without having the skill or the discipline to use it properly, and so they blew through it. And by the time they got to the year, they were poorer than they were before they started. So I want to challenge you to think of the need to develop the right attitude toward money and things. Billy Graham said, if a person gets his attitude toward money straight, it will straighten out almost every other area of their life. You see, the bottom line is the person who has God and has everything has no more than the person who has God and has nothing. Everything else plus God isn't more than God. Having God is all you need, and we need to start thinking in those ways. Oh, I've got God, but I want the mansion and the car and the Lamborghini and the airport and all this. No, God says, no. I'm all you need. And we need to learn to start thinking about putting God in his rightful place. When God is on his rightful throne in our lives, we're looking to God for all we need and hope and security. Then we don't really need anything more than God. And then money and things are able to be used in helpful ways for us and for others. I have some friends of mine, and it always impressed me when I was a kid because a 16-year-old son who was my age, when I was 16. I mean, he's my age now, but anyway, him and his wife, he was a crop dusting pilot. He got out of the military and ran a crop dusting service in the Midwest somewhere. Thing was, his dad owned a company called Stockham Industries. Stockham Industries was worth billions. And they were the only company at the time that produced this particular product. And so they basically had a monopoly on it. And the family process was that when he turned 18, basically Daddy said, you know what, you're on your own. You want to go to college? That's great. You pay for it. You want to get out and make a living? When I die, you get everything. But until then, you got to work. And that's what he was doing. When he was about 35, his father ended up dying, and he inherited Stockham Industries. So CEO, chairman of the board. You know, from the time he was 35 on, he worked 2 days a week, 2 days a year. He had to go to the board meetings, and he'd go up to the board meeting, come home, and that's the only thing he did. But if you met those people, and you met Mrs. Stockham, you would think, these people grew up rich? Because money means nothing to them. I mean, when we were kids, he had an airplane, and he had all this stuff, but he lived in a 2-bedroom house. Now, admittedly, it was a nice 2-bedroom house, but it wasn't show-off. It wasn't lots of money. They were basic, down-to-earth folks. And the reality is that they gave and gave and gave because they wanted to give. And they kept it quiet. They didn't want anybody in the church knew how much they give. And so it was always, amazing how they would donate so much, and we would see, and nobody would know it. Because they learned that money doesn't solve their problems. So, when God is on his rightful throne and in our lives, and we're looking to God for all that we need and hope for, that's when money has its use. That's when we can use it. Jesus made it clear that a person cannot serve both God and money. Mark Twain wrote, some men worship rank, some men worship heroes, some worship power, some worship God. And over these ideals they dispute and cannot unite, but they all worship money. A man named Ernest Becker wrote that our culture would replace God with sex and romance. But Friedrich Nietzsche, you ever heard of him, wrote that with the absence of God growing in Western culture, we would replace God with money. He became the God of the Western culture. And I think Nietzsche was right. But the scariest part about it is that most of us are blind to the culture of greed we live in and the grip of greed that often has a hold of us. let me give you a for instance. Most Americans live in the top 5% economically of the culture of the world. Most Americans have more money than 95% of the world. You know, in some countries, $1 a day is considered a rich man. Yet we have people making minimum wage that are making $15 an hour. Now I realize that it costs more to live here, and I understand that, but it's an environment where we've inflated what we're worth. And so we've made money the central focus of our existence. And the bottom line is Christians are ignorant of it. We don't realize it. We don't consider it. We don't realize that we're taken and put it in God's place. Here's the reality is the human heart always, when we try to serve both, we end up serving money more than God. The human heart seeks to justify itself, and then it comes to money and greed. The God of money is a master of deception. Okay? We compare our financial studying and handling of money. We rarely compare ourselves with those who have less than we have. Rather, we usually compare ourselves with those who have more. And so we tend to justify ourselves saying, I don't live as well as him or her or them. My means and my lifestyle are modest compared to others. So I'm not under greed's grip. And as a result, most Americans think of themselves as middle class. And only 2% call themselves upper class. But here's the problem, folks. The average person in the world makes about $1,000 a year if they're lucky. Some of them don't make that. We compare our financial standing and our handling of money, we compare it to the people who are doing better than us, and we think, well, I'm poor compared to him. But the reality is, you're richer than 95% of the rest of the people in this world. God has blessed you. The biblical writers, man, they all had a lot to say about money. Philip Yancey identified over 450 biblical passages that deal with handling money. The issue of money forms the second most dominant motif in the entire Bible, exceeded in emphasis only by the subject of idolatry. Nearly 1/6 of the recorded statements of Jesus concern money. Of the 38 parables that Jesus told, 18 of them dealt with the subject of money. Jesus warns people far more often about greed than he does about sex, and yet almost no one thinks they're guilty of greed. I think we don't realize that greed is a problem in our lives, and we're greedy. We're generally very greedy people. Don't believe me? Okay, let's think about it this way. The God of money says, I deserve this, right? This is what I get, this is what I owed, and so I deserve to have all this. Greed could easily be the problem for us, and because it hides itself so deeply and successfully, we may not even realize we have a problem with it. The problem isn't money itself, because money isn't good or bad in and of itself. Rather, the problem is the love of money. That's why Paul wrote in 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So let's take a look at two people in the Bible who loved money and were serving the God of money. And I want you to think about this, and do you see yourself in this picture? The first biblical person that I want us to learn about is a man named, and the Bible doesn't give his name, but his story is found in Luke 12, and we often refer to him as the rich fool. So let's listen to this. So one day, when Jesus was teaching a crowd of listeners, a man in the crowd spoke up and said, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And Jesus replied, Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you? And Jesus said to the crowd, Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, What shall I do? for I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, the night your soul will be required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So here's the story. You got this rich guy, right? He thinks it's got it all figured out. Right? Now here's the problem. The guy comes to him and says, look, tell my brother to divide my... Now, the first biblical person, okay, is this rich fool. It's likely that this man is a younger brother, right? Because in all that culture, according to the Levitical law, family inheritance goes 2/3 of the estate to the older brother and only 1/3 to the younger one. So Jesus was wise enough not to insert himself into a personal conflict because that's not what the guy was asking, and I'm not going to get involved in that. But when Jesus used his teachable moment to teach everyone present about the danger of serving the god of money, the story describes someone who was worshiping the god of money. Give me more, I'm not satisfied, I want more and more and more. If you look closely, you'll notice the man refers to himself 9 times in 2 verses. Right? We see no acknowledgement from this man that what actually had was come from God. This guy is being richly blessed, and is it anything God did for me? No. I made the crops grow, and I produced all the grain and the wheat. I'm sorry, but God does all that. Whatever we have, folks, is on loan from God. It's not yours, it's his. He gave it to you, be a steward of it, and he expects you to use it for his glory. But that doesn't mean it's yours. It belongs to him, and you need to figure out who the real owner is of all that stuff you're carrying around. Because it belongs to God, and it belongs to him to use how he wants to. And if he wants to take it away from you, it's his to take away. And if he wants to give you more, he'll give you more. But it's up to God. Psalm 24:1 clearly states it. The earth is the Lord's and his fullness thereof. The CEV version puts it this way. The earth and everything on it, including its people, belong to the Lord. The world and its people belong to him. God has given us the use of the resources for a short time here on earth. And we have much to be grateful for. Go through your day sometime just recognizing that everything in God, get out of God's head, get out of God's bed, walk into God's bathroom, turn on God's shower, then put on God's clothes, eat God's cereal, which he says are Frosted Flakes, and drink God's coffee, get in God's car, and head to where God leaves you to work. When we start to see all of our resources as God's, it helps us to develop an attitude that we need to be grateful for everything he gives us. And so we're not running around grumping, well, so-and-so got this, and so-and-so got that, and I want this, and I want that. No, God, I'm grateful for what you've given me. This is God's dog. I wish God would do something about this dog. This dog drives me crazy, but he's God's dog. God put him in my life. God put this in my life, so I'm responsible for him because God put him in his life. That's why I take care of him. That's why I'm not mean to him. God gave me my family. They're not my family. They're God's family. I'm just giving stewardship over them. See, here's the problem. The man looked to money as the source of his satisfaction. It's the source of his security. Told himself they had plenty of good things lined up for our years. And we try to accumulate enough where we feel like we're set, we have no worries. When we look to money as security, it becomes our God. When we find our security in that, J.D. Rockefeller was once asked, he was the richest man in the world at the time, when will you have enough money? And he looked at it and says, I just want $1 more. Just as soon as I get $1 more, I'll be satisfied. Well, the problem is he always just wanted more, always wanted more, always wanted more. He's never going to be satisfied because he's always wanting just one more. And so the problem then, of course, is that when you make God the source of security and something goes wrong, you think, man, God has abandoned me. It amazes me. We turn to the God of money as our source of security, but when everything goes wrong, who do we blame? We blame the God in heaven because we've not been worshiping him. We've been worshiping something he created. The man, He looked at money as his source of satisfaction. He thought to himself that all he accumulated and would allow him to eat, drink, and be merry. His satisfaction did not come from pleasing God or having a right relationship with others, but came from money and what money could buy. Just a little bit more, just give me a little bit more. Third, the man looked for money as his source of significance, right? The focus was on himself and how much he accumulated. Others would certainly respect him and envy him because of how big his barns were. The God of money wants us to believe that our significance comes from what we make of ourselves, that our self-worth is a product of our net worth. This is me, this is what makes me important, is how much I have. The man in Luke 12 put his trust in money and his possessions, and his plan was to retire early, eat, drink, and be merry. But that's not what happened. God called him a fool and took his life from him the very night. The man learned the hard way that allowing the God of money to lead him to store up treasure himself and fell away from being rich toward God the Father. Guys, all the resources, all the stuff you think you have will not make you happy. It will not give you security. It will not give you satisfaction. It will not give you significance. Now, there's a second biblical person I want to look at, and this guy is named Zacchaeus, right? Now, most of us are familiar with the Zacchaeus, Luke 9, right? 19. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, lived in Jericho, just like most people in our day. Don't like people who work for the tax company. IRS, people in that day didn't like tax collectors who worked for the Roman government. Now, it was a little different. In fact, they considered them worse sinners than any sinner on earth. They had a special job title, publicans and tax collectors. Sinners were worse than the worst robbers, the worst murderers, as far as they're concerned, because they thought them to be traitors, and they tended to rob the people that they collected tax from. Zacchaeus was a Jewish man who had sold himself out to the Romans, who was shunned by the Jewish community around him. Why would anyone take such a job as a tax collector? Why would seduce a man to betray his people and live as a pariah on his own society? The answer, of course, is money. No collections were among the tax collectors were among the wealthiest people in society and were among the most hated and were listed among the sinners. So when Zacchaeus heard that Jesus was coming through, he did an unusual thing. He climbed a tree to be able to get a good look at Jesus, right? Zacchaeus was vertically challenged. He couldn't see Jesus because of the crowd. No one was about to allow Zacchaeus to stand in their place, and so he was pushed to the back. In addition, in traditional cultures, while honor and dignity were prized, no man would climb up a tree to see. That would draw enormous ridicule. But Zacchaeus' willingness to climb a tree signifies his desperation. Zacchaeus had more money than he could spend, but he knew that something important was missing. And maybe Jesus could offer what he needed. To the great surprise of everyone, including Zacchaeus, Jesus called him by name and invited him to eat with Zacchaeus at Zacchaeus' house. When Zacchaeus saw that Jesus had chosen him, the least virtuous person in the crowd, for a personal relationship, his whole spiritual attitude and his understanding changed. And look at how it changes. Look, Zacchaeus wanted to follow Jesus, and immediately he realized that if he was to do that, then his relationship with money was an issue that it had to change. So what does he say? He says in Luke 19:8, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I gave to the poor, and I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." In front of everyone, Zacchaeus says that. How is it that for breaking the chain of God of money had on Zacchaeus for so long? He promised to give away 50% of his wealth to the poor. He also promised to repay people for the ways he had cheated them. He knew how many he had amassed, much of what he had amassed over the years by cheating people. Can you imagine the line of people waiting to be compensated? And amazingly, he wasn't going to repay them penny for penny. He would pay them back 4 times more than what he had taken from them. What had brought about this amazing transformation? When Jesus came to Zacchaeus, he realized that although he was financially rich, he was spiritually bankrupt. But by God's grace, he was willing to give him spiritual riches. And at that moment, Zacchaeus removed the God of money from the throne in his life and replaced it with Jesus, the God of mercy. What Jesus did in Zacchaeus' life, he will do for each one of us. God will help us to stop serving the God of money, but we must initiate that change. We have to surrender control. We don't have to end up like the rich fool of Luke 12, rather like Zacchaeus. We can wake up to our wrong relationship with money before it's too late. To help us do that, let's ask ourselves some questions for reflection here. Number one, how often do you compare what you have with what you make and what you make with others? Our world and the God of money encourages us to measure our life and our worth by our money and possessions, but we must resist that temptation. Jesus reminds us that a person's life doesn't consist in the abundance of the possessions. Question number two, how much anxiety do finances add to your life? We might regularly face financial challenge, but how do we try to face them? Does worry take over, or do we trust in our efforts alone, or do we look for God to help? Question number three, to what extent are your dreams and goals driven by money? If you had more money, are you more likely to spend most of it on yourself? Okay. What do you do with it when you get stuff? Question number four, what is your attitude toward giving? And this is between you and God, right? What percentage of your income do you currently give away? I'm not just talking about tithing, I'm talking about giving away. You know, tithing is only the first 10%. After, you're not giving until you get above 10%. Right? If you're not faithful with a little, what are the chances that you'll be faithful with a lot? Okay? The best way to keep money from controlling you is to give it away. The God of money is almost really irresistible. He spun tales of sports cars, luxury homes, and all the good things he's going to buy for us. Yes, we had heard of the old refrain that money can't buy happiness. We knew that. We had seen that and had done to people over and over. But we were going to be different. We would know how to use money without letting it use us. We didn't want to buy happiness. We just wanted to rent a little pleasure. But somewhere it all went wrong. Somehow the God of money became a slave driver. He kept us running, following him, trying to keep him from getting away. We followed the green brick road, and we longed for rest. We put our hope in that what we might find at the end of the rainbow. We thought money would provide us with security, significance, and some measure of satisfaction. Strangely, even when we had money, we were broke. Then we chose Jesus and discovered that he is our provider. He provides us everything we need. He provides us with security because he never leaves us or forsakes us. He provides us with significance because our identity and value are found in him and him alone. He provides us with satisfaction because our souls are made for him. We discovered that God would meet all our needs to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. I want to close with an old story, and I realize this is not Christmas, it's July, so it's coming up on July, so we're going to call this Christmas in July story. Okay? There's a character called Ebenezer Scrooge, right, who lives to make money and very little else. Ebenezer Scrooge had no use for religion or sentimentality, until one Christmas Eve he received a terrifying wake-up call. The spirit of his deceased business partner, Jacob Marley, who died 7 Christmas Eves ago, was a miser like Scrooge. Came to visit Scrooge, bound and wrapped in terrible chains. Jacob Marley had been condemned to roam the face of the earth, tormented in death by the things he had neglected to value in life. Marley was desperate to give his old colleague a final chance to avoid the same fate. Marley made it clear that it was Scrooge's last opportunity to turn from his selfish ways. Marley explained that 3 more spirits would visit him, the spirits of Christmas past, present, and future. So when the clock struck 1, the spirit of Christmas past arrived and took Scrooge on an unforgettable trip down memory lane, on a visit to his own childhood. The spirit took him into a schoolroom. They see a lonely little boy sitting by the fire, whose only companion is the book he was reading. Scrooge remembered his loneliness and how he longed for the presence of friends. He recalled his past desires for the love and approval of his family. Then he saw all the people who tried to reach out to him, who attempted to stop his slide into self-absorption. He saw his former fiancée, who came in a poor second to Scrooge's passion for wealth. "A golden idol displaces me," she complained to him from the past. "All hopes have merged into a master passion. The thought of money engrosses you." If Scrooge had been shaken by the visit of the first spirit, the second one was no less disturbing. The spirit of Christmas present arrived to take him on a tour of the people he now knew. He found him standing in the home of his poor clerk, Bob Cratchit, where he felt the warmth of a large and friendly family who were making the best of what little they could afford on the tiny salary Scrooge paid. Scrooge experienced the anxiety over the fate of Tiny Tim, their sick youngest child. Scrooge was clearly shown the effects of his selfish nature. The Spirit helped him understand that even though he's utterly hard-hearted, others had not given up on him. The Cratchits, he took him to visit, and the Cratchits sat down and ate their feeble Christmas dinner. Bob Cratchit thanks to toast his boss. Despite protests from his wife, Tiny Tim answers the toast with one of his own. God bless us, everyone. The final spirit, the spirit of Christmas future, arrived, and it had no face and it did not speak. It merely pointed at Scrooge, looked to where his spirit was pointing, and he saw Cratchit family again, worn down in their struggle against poverty, and now without Tiny Tim, whose lonely crutch stood unused in a corner. The Spirit took Scrooge to visit the house of a man who had died in his sleep. A maid and a cleaner were dividing up his belongings before the undertaker arrived. Two associates out in the street were discussing whether it was even necessary to hold a funeral service, since no one would bother to come. But who is this man? Asked Scrooge. The Spirit led him to a grave, whose headstone bore the name Ebenezer Scrooge, died 1843. No other words adorn his grave marker. The two grave diggers lived as open grave to visit the local pub. It seems that Scrooge lived long enough to make it miserable for everyone. Thankfully for Scrooge, he recognized that his life-changing moment, it was now or never. Scrooge asked her what is possible to amend his ways and so alter his life and destiny. Surely the spirits wouldn't be visiting him if not. As Christmas morning dawned and he awoke once more to the world, Scrooge realized he had been given a reprieve, a second chance. Dickens believed that we all have been given another chance, only because of the birth of Jesus, the true hero of the greatest Christmas story. At the heart of the Christmas Carol has Scrooge's transformation. He changes from a selfish, greedy, bitter old man into a grateful, generous, compassionate person. Scrooge stopped serving the god of money and began to use money to bless others. Scrooge was a man who saw his life transformed to the point where Dickens concludes that he became as good a friend, a good a master, and as good a man as the good old city ever knew. And it concludes by saying, and he knew how to keep Christmas in his heart year round. Because he had found the King of Christmas. His name was Jesus Christ. So when you look at your life, and I look at mine, do we see too much Scrooge living in us? Maybe like Scrooge, we too are living too selfishly or greedily. Maybe like Scrooge, we too are not valuing people as we should. Maybe like Scrooge, we also need a Christmas Eve conversion. If we turn to God and submit ourselves to Him, He will do a wonderful work in our lives, but only when we surrender control to the one true God and take the God of money out of our lives. We don't have to end up like the rich fool. We can follow the example of Zacchaeus and even Ebenezer Scrooge, overcome the lure and the trap of the God of money, and found the one true God who really mattered. What about you? Are you willing to take the things you put in your life and say, I want to make God the center. I want to take this idol out of my life and turn it away. So ask yourself, are you living too selfishly? Are you not valuing people as we should? Maybe you need a transformation. And I realize it's June and it's not even July yet and it's not even Christmas. We all need to meet the King of Christmas. We all need to surrender and turn to Him and submit ourselves to Him. And He will do a wonderful work in our lives. He will transform us. Let's close in prayer. Father, the God of money, the God of wealth, the God of gimme, so easily in the way. We lose sight of what's truly important. And then we don't understand why we don't get you. We've taken all these things and we've said, this is more important than a relationship. My job or my wife or my kids or whatever. And it's all about us. It's all about me, my. Lord, I'm afraid we all have an eye problem. We all have eye troubles because we put I on the throne. We crown money our God. And all we think about is how to accumulate more. It's not about money. a discussion pit with love seats and sectionals and everything else. There's one throne, and that's for you. Help us to examine our lives. We can take all the things that we've given our allegiance to and submit to you. Help us to examine our relationship with money, that we can see the counterfeit gods that we put